First of all, I'd like to thank you for a very interesting and detailed presentation, very insightful. My name is Anthony Silverberg. I'm with the Zenzi Institute. Looking at all these figures, I still think, I don't understand why you have left out the main source of all these problems, which is the exploding population of the world. They say that by 2030, there'll be 9 billion people on Earth. This is itself unsustainable. Now, all these mega cities that you speak about are dysfunctional in themselves. Shanghai, Lagos, Mexico City. Already we're getting all these stress points now, which is climate change and HIV and Ebola. The only country which has looked at this problem so far has been China with its one-child policy. That also isn't working. What is the solution for the world to get a sustainable future? Because we cannot carry on the way we are. Thank you.
Happy Kambuda from Project 90. I'd like to thank you for the lecture and the presentation. I would like to say that what came out of this is that, I don't know how people take this, but the nation state as it was is dead. And we have to actually reconcile the idea that we are in Cape Town. And I'll go much further and say that you cannot identify the face of South Africa. You can identify the face of Cape Town because we see each other every day. The mayor, and I'll put it like that, would be the right person to actually negotiate at the table, yeah, because they know exactly what's happening. As far as the local council should be there. So in going forward a little bit so that I can finish, as much as you had the 200 mayors, I would think you'd have all of the mayors there. I mean, you've got the resources to do that. And I don't think that 9 billion, 7 billion people are the problem. It's the economic that we have, the economic system that we have, that is the problem. And I'll just respond to the gentleman over there and say, maybe we should think about how much we're consuming ourselves. A lot of the people who are consuming so much more than the person who should be getting the average or the mean. Thanks.
We have a number of questions coming from the online audience. I'll just read them through. Some of them, I believe, were already answered, and you choose actually which one to cover. Changing the everyday lives of our ordinary people is our work. What role towns and cities should play, and how do we enable change? Is the urban transformation possible? These are kind of general questions. Now, the new urban geographies are creating new histories. Can open streets be part of a new global narrative? How is local transformation linked to a global urban transition? Then on the urban sustainable development goal, make cities and human settlements inclusive, as you said. What's the role of civil society? Then is the current kind of urbanization inevitable? And the final one, I know it's a pile of questions. What happens to secondary cities where most opportunity lies for jobs and development?
I guess I'll quickly respond to the internet questions first. Many of them are sort of, I've dealt with the presentation. I'll pick up just two. Civil society is a very important role in this process, especially as we sort of move to a more interconnected world. In some senses, civil society is very much part of this new frame of governance, whether it's international civil society or civil society organizations within countries. And in cities, I would imagine, depending on what kind of political regime you have, they're going to be very critical in enabling a whole range of changes and a lot of this stuff to happen, whether it's from building capacity to delivering services, to actually engaging with poverty and vulnerability at one end, or enabling simple technical changes. So the state has its strengths and its limitations. The private sector does things for a particular motive, and some things are difficult to cost and internalize into that frame. So civil society, I think, is a very, very important role to sort of play in that. They're both theoretical and other positions there. On secondary cities, like I said just recently, secondary cities are very critical to this process. In fact, some of the externalities that you were talking about that come from very large agglomerations can be dealt with by much more networked urban structures where you have a lot more secondary cities. And of course, what that does is that it spreads out both development opportunities and employment opportunities across the landscape. So a whole range of regional development challenges start getting addressed as we develop secondary cities. And they're also much more tied to the established cities. Don't come out by accident. They come up by through a whole range of processes that take place, economic, social, etc. So secondary cities are quite important. The reason that you didn't see the mayors of secondary cities there was that we hadn't started actually opening the dialogue with them. But in the long run, as I said, you can't get to the 5,000. 5,000 was a notional term in some senses, till you get the secondary cities inside. Unfortunately, of course, in many countries that I know, it would be very difficult for a mayor of a secondary city to go up and sit at the same table as the head of state and have a serious discussion. While some of these mayors they deal with more power and more resources than many heads of state. So, it's also a question of trying to open up a dialogue which, frankly, is a stratified dialogue that's around power and economic resources that you're dealing with. In terms of a question of population, obviously, we know that this is something that's been a challenge for forever and ever. Even when some of us had worked on some of these global modeling things in the 80s and 90s, population obviously is a critical question. The issue, of course, for us now is that we have 7.5 billion people. And a lot of the people who are going to be around for the rest of the century are alive. And both ethically and otherwise, I would tend to look at our people as a tremendous resource. And the reason that we have a population explosion in many parts of the world is precisely because we have actually delayed the opportunity of providing adequate human development to a whole range of people. That's certainly true of my country. Whether it's healthcare or adequate education, especially for women, those are things that dramatically feed back into population systems. And people are not stupid, They will have less children when it makes sense for them to have less children. And very often we work from a remembered past which may not be true today. But if you're working with a country that had a high infant mortality and you want some of your children to survive and you need them as part of a whole economic system, then you tend to make certain choices. And of course, in many places in the world, women don't necessarily have choices. So there are a whole range of complex questions there. But if you just look at that increment, we're talking about 1.5 billion. It's a lot. That's as many people as we had in 1900. But given the base that we have, I would err on the side of saying people are a most important resource. It is through the action of people and communities and processes that we can actually solve these challenges. But they have to be empowered institutionally through adequate education and given space to actually engage in these dialogues. So, I would tend to look at it the other way around. And on the question of cities versus nation states, I don't know how many political scientists there are in this room. I wouldn't actually, I wouldn't write off the nation state that quickly, even though it's a relatively new innovation. The firm and the nation state are born about 500 years ago. So compared to cities and the great religions and major civilizational cultures, they're fairly young. But they're a very important part of how we deal with things. it will be very difficult to deal with very practical questions. We take an electric grid system. There's no way that you could take all the cities of a country and they would be able to build an electric grid system that could provide power to everybody. You do need an aggregation at a higher level. I think there's a much larger question, I didn't show the slides there, about how our future frame of governance will work. And we have fantastic experiments, which have their own challenges, of course, like the European Union, where we are coming to engagements that are larger than individual nation states. Of course, the experiment in Africa has been somewhat contested. But the idea that we move to a situation in which human unity is the central element of what we're talking about and not division based on ethnicity, language, or territory is something that we do need to consider. But I think that's part of what I didn't show you. There are 6 slides I didn't show you here at the end of this. Those are questions about the paradigm. Can we govern with another frame than the nation state? Are our identities narrow enough that becomes the only way that we can organize ourselves? And these are serious social science questions, and I think these are questions that each culture has to actually play itself out. Cities are important, but I don't think they're going to replace everything else. That would be a somewhat foolhardy way of looking at things. This is an engagement between different types of institutions. We don't always have frameworks that can enable them to talk to each other and actually work together. I think we're encouraging countries and cities to try and open those conversations and experiment on how these things will change. This thing will change over maybe, your lifetime, if not mine. They take 30, 40, 50 years to change, if not longer. And technology will play a role in making that happen.